the devil is in the detail, is what I would say. And doing a full review of your service before you make a decision on what the right solution is critical. Because it's not the right. So to outsource, it's not the right solution for everyone to outsource. It's not the right solution to have everything in. Sometimes it's a mixture of both. It really depends on the challenge you're trying to solve for.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Hiring Excellence Podcast. I'm Johnny Campbell, your host for today and CEO and co-founder of Social Talent. And we're broadcasting today from the beautiful Villa Rosa, just outside Sitges in Barcelona, where we're hosting our Spring Supper Club, where we've got about 20 odd talent leaders in for the next couple of days discussing what's, I guess, top of their mind in their teams. And I'm joined by one of those leaders here today, this morning, a beautiful sunny morning, and to talk about when to outsource, when to insource, and looking at the options that different leaders are facing today around trying to drive change within their talent acquisition team. Gemma Milner is here with me today. Gemma is the head of talent acquisition and global mobility for PwC, based in the UK. She'll tell us a little bit more about her role and the team there, and we'll dive into, I guess, her journey in terms of making decisions around how the team should be structured and how it's changed over the last few years. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. Gemma, would you mind introducing yourself personally first? Maybe tell us a little bit your career, how you ended up at PwC, and then maybe we'll chat a bit about PwC after that.
I've been in recruitment for 28 years now. I mean, I don't like saying that because it makes me feel really old. Well, really,
you were teenagers when we started. It's okay.
We were teenagers. we babies. And I've done a number of different sectors. So I've done finance, I've done big box retail like Asda when it was part of Walmart. I've worked for Direct Line Group on separation from Royal Bank of Scotland. And I've done some outsourcing as well. I worked for an organisation called GRI, where my clients were Asda, Argos, Wincanton, and Sainsbury's. And then I moved to Royal Mail Group. And so I was at Royal Mail Group for a few years, and then from Royal Mail Group, joined PwC. So on joining PwC, it was 3.5 years ago now, I think. Yeah. And I guess the brief at the time was to review the model and is it fit for purpose? I don't think there is a one size fits all. It depends on what you're walking into and, you know, where the challenges are and the direction.
Would you mind walking back and just maybe give me the context of, like, for those who aren't familiar with professional services, or I'd be stunned if they're not familiar with PwC, but how big is the firm? How is it structured? What kind of roles are you hiring for?
So PwC is a global firm. We've got offices in every major country in the world. The UK firm is around 22,000 people. It's a partnership, and so that brings complexity. The lines of service are tax, audit, consulting, deals, operate function, business solutions, which is all our central functions as well. We also have a tech catalyst function as well, which supports things like AI, the sort of areas are set in that world.
And most people might assume that, like, Big Four hiring is all about graduate hiring. So what's the mix of, well, first of all, what kind of volumes are you doing? What's the mix of grad intake versus professional experience hires?
So I don't look after early careers. I just look after experienced hiring. We still have a huge graduate scheme that we run every year. We had about 8,000 applications this year when we opened our grad scheme. But for experienced hiring, we're at around 2,000, 2,500 hires a year.
How has that gone up and down? Let's say before you joined 3.5 years ago. Since then, is it fairly static, or has it been up and down like a roller coaster?
It's probably been fairly static, but it's I guess the peaks and troughs are very unpredictable in our world.
Mm.
So the volumes massively increased through COVID, same as many organizations had, so probably around doubled.
Wow.
And then obviously as things settle down, the numbers have come down. So fairly static around that kind of 2,000, 2,500 sort of hires a year. But that's driven by client need. And so you can have a lot of unexpected peaks throughout the year. And so that ability to flex to that demand is really important, because although the overall number is the number, when all that lands, it can all land in a big lump, or it can be, quite evenly spread out, and then you can see a drop. So that's very difficult to manage from a workforce perspective.
Do you haven't nailed workforce planning yet as an organization?
I'd love to find an organization that actually, when you set out the TA demand for the year, actually ends up there's TA demand for the year.
So when you came in 3.5 years ago, it was beginning to settle in terms of the numbers. Post-COVID, attrition coming down, settling like most organizations.
Yeah.
So what was, if the business described something as wrong or not ideal, what were they measuring that wasn't perfect, that required you to do a review?
There was a lot of sentiment. So the sentiment was, it didn't feel quick enough. It didn't feel like they were getting what they needed. In some elements, it wasn't supported enough by technology to make their lives easier. There was, but there was an awful lot of anecdotal feedback. The data at the time, because of how the teams were set up, wasn't signaling exactly what was going on. And so the first thing that we had to do was make sure there was consistency through the process. And so I guess clearing up. So you can see the wood for the trees to be able to make decisions on what we needed to do going forward. So to get clean data, everyone had to start operating in the same way and using the system in the same way. And so putting more governance in how we operate and checks and balances to make sure we stay on track with that started to give us really clean data, so we can see where the areas that we wanted to focus on, and then started playing that back to the business. And what it highlights is it's always two ways, right? And so we might have a challenge on time to hire, but then when you start to peel back a little bit, is that because we can't get interview availability, or is it because we're chasing feedback, but without that data, obviously you can't see where the pitfalls are. When we started putting that in place, it started to give us a much cleaner picture. But there was obviously more to do to make sure that we're enhancing the experience for both hiring managers and candidates.
And did you formalize sentiment analysis from hiring managers, candidates as well?
Yeah, so that was part of. So if I work back in kind of more of what the strategy was, so to look at the model, so to reinvent, if you like, how we did TA, was that stabilize piece first. So stabilize and govern was the first part of the strategy, and that was the cleanup of the data, make sure it's accurate, ensure everyone's working in the same way, make sure that we've got processes that everyone understands. We implemented a TA policy and a hiring manager charter, so that we had some real clear direction for the business on how we protect them and make sure that we're managing risk, but also that whole experience bit and what we need back from them in regards to the hiring charter. I've forgotten what your original question was on that.
More of this, the sentiment you asked, because you said initially it was anecdotal.
Oh yes, sorry. Yeah.
But did that get formalized?
So once we'd stabilized the team, put those checks and balances in place. We then did listening sessions. So we did first we did a survey out to all our hiring managers, and then we did listening groups as well. So we did like follow-on conversations, which was around 100 people that we spoke to through that process to get their feedback, align it with now what we've got with clean data. And a lot of their frustrations were fairly typical and the stuff that you'd expect, and the things that hiring managers, do share back. Like interview scheduling, how can we make that better? How are we bringing talent in? How can we get better reaction in the market? So the that really specialist skill set, we recruit some real weird and wonderful roles that there's probably about 2 in the whole of the UK that actually do that and have that skill set that we're looking for. And so how do we get better at being able to tap into that market and do more direct sourcing than we were doing? Because previously, I guess the volumes were so high, there was just churning through. Now what we needed to do was get very much more targeted on who and how we bring them in. And the model wasn't set up for that. So there were 360 recruiters at that time. So they're doing everything. And we've got quite a complex process as well that they were administering. So a lot of the time we're taken up by admin, I guess. And so we needed to change that round. But that was very much coming through in the sentiment from the business.
And you also mentioned the way it had been structured, which is very typical of professional services, was you probably have recruiters who were very aligned to, let's say, tax, and one group are aligned to audit, and not really consider themselves as shared recruiters amongst the business. They worked for a business. That's the way it worked. And so that was probably a challenge, because the peaks and troughs you mentioned, obviously, you can't really iron them out when you have teams who feel only aligned to one part of the business and that's all they recruit for.
Absolutely. And each team were operating in a slightly different way. So then if you moved from recruiting for tax to recruiting for audit, there's a training needs there as well. So they had to retrain. So that kind of came about by the teams aligning to that loss and listening to the needs of that loss, I'm talking that line of service is what we call it. Listening to that business area around what they needed rather than the whole business. And so we started to see discrepancies in how they operated. But to your point, you don't have any flexibility then in the model when you'll have some teams that are super busy and some teams that are really quiet. And it's not easy to move them around because they're all operating in a slightly different way. So
go back to the strategy then. When you have gone through phase 1, where you're trying to basically just get the data correct, you're moving on to common processes, common way of working, you're getting more qualitative feedback about what's good and what's bad. At what point did you get to the point where you had to then look at decisions to change? Like, did you have enough information at that point to go, right, we now know what has to be fixed, now we have to decide how to fix it?
Yeah, but I mean, that makes it sound like that was a really quick process, and it wasn't. I mean, I think the biggest part of it was that getting the consistency in how people worked. I think that took the most time, and explaining to the business, like our stakeholders and the teams, that how you bring people in can change, and depending on who you're looking for, and that's right. But once they're in a process, there's no need for that to be any different. There isn't any, variation within the line of service that requires that actual how you move someone through the process to be different. And so unpicking some of that took some time. But then, yes, so we'd cleaned up the data. We'd got one way of working in the main. And we'd done the listening sessions, but not just to the business, the team as well. So what do they think is like holding them back from being able to deliver the kind of service that we want to deliver? And where do they see some of the challenges as well, so that we had that full, I guess, feedback loop to start to inform, right, what can we look at here?
And the volumes had changed as well. Like you had built a team for recruiting in 21, 22, or the organization had. You come in as it begun to level out, attrition drops. I imagine the processes weren't right anymore. The team size wasn't right anymore.
Yeah.
So all these other factors have to be considered when you're trying to come up with a new strategy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what would you say was that, with the kind of, if there was one kind of North Star to what you're trying to achieve, or a couple of things that were the focus, what were you trying to build or get to? What was the kind of big goal?
It was the experience, really. And we needed to get best people in the market to help us as a firm become the preeminent firm, if you like. And how do we support our business to do that? So it was multifaceted. There isn't one, we weren't doing this to save money. We weren't doing, it was to give the right solution at the right cost and the right experience for the business. So considering all those elements, that also to support where we wanted to be going forward. So like a future facing model.
So what were the options then when you kind of had done that work and you're like, right, we need to change? What did you present to the business as the possible options?
So the existing model was part outsource. So we had we've got experienced hire, we've got contingent hire, both that sit in my world. We then have early careers that sit within TA, but a peer of mine runs that. The outsourced parts were contingent, so we that was fully outsourced in the main. I can't think of the word.
Pre-retirement.
Yeah, yeah, pre-me. And experienced hire was outsourced at the junior levels, so just senior associate hiring, and it up to manager, and that was picked up the rest of it by the internal team. So I guess the options were to recreate that, stay as you are almost, but making sure that it's the right shape and size, or bring it all in and have it all in-house, outsource it, but making it worthwhile. Because one of the problems with the previous model is you could be a hiring manager and you've got a vacancy for a senior associate, but you might also be hiring a director, but you're talking to two different recruiters because they're sat in two different teams. And that also brought a level of frustration for the business. So I just want to talk to one person. I don't want to talk to three people about my three different roles, kind of thing.
So kind of no solution's perfect, right? Pros and cons. But you did, spoiler alert, go with outsourcing. So walk me through what were the trade-offs and what were the kind of core reasons that outsourcing worked for you?
So it was a huge change program. I think that was the challenge, that it was the biggest transformation we've done within TA and PwC. And so I guess it was being really sure. We had to have full confidence in we were making the right decisions, because it was a significant change for our organisation and our team. And so getting that right was really important. And so taking the time to understand how we uplifting the experience, what insight and expertise are we bringing in to be able to support the team going forward, what's that model going to look like. And so we knew we wanted to do more direct sourcing, and so making sure that we could tap into that expertise quickly to bring that in, um, and the technology on offer, I guess, as well. So, and how the cost,
Of course,
obviously. So,
commercials, the tech, and the capabilities to
yeah,
be able to flex for the new model, basically.
exactly. And like say that ability to flex up and down. So, you know, what we needed either the ability in house or the ability for a provider
Mm.
to be able to flex up and down much quicker, to be able to respond to the demand signals. And outsourcing gave us that flexibility. Um, yeah, because they can tap into bigger teams, they can tap into their offshore teams when they need to as well. So yeah, that's
You mentioned to me one of the other big reasons is because you can hold an outsourced partner to account for SLAs
yeah,
in a different way than perhaps internal stakeholders who might be offshored.
yeah.
Like walk me through some of those SLAs you thought about. What would you need to hold a partner to account for? Is that in terms of delivery times, quality levels, all that stuff?
Well, to be able to play out, I guess, the commerciality part of that relationship and, some of the reasons why you commit to go with a partner is making sure that you're driving through those savings that I guess you've talked about upfront. And so some of that has got to be around agency usage
Mm.
and, commitment on what that looks like. Your standard metrics around time to hire, but also your the breakdown within those steps. So, how long does it take to get a vacancy up and live? How long is it taking to then have a briefing call with the hiring manager? And so those SLAs are really important because the commercial side of it on how much it's costing us as a business, but also the experience side. So how are we making sure that that the process is being managed in a timely fashion, um, but also quality. So um, uh, hiring manager surveys,
Mm.
candidate surveys, and the results of that are also tied into SLAs, so that we've got a full view of the service that they're providing.
And the partner you went with was so. How important was it for you to understand their customer references, understand that they have that experience of that scale in that type of environment with those structures? Because you mentioned obviously the partnership environment is quite different to a typical corporate environment. It's not the same.
No, no.
So, did you dig into that with their background and reference checks?
Yeah, I mean, we ran a full RFP for the process, so there were a number of providers that we spoke to throughout. It was, I guess, the main thing that um, we were really clear on was alignment culturally.
Mm.
And so, and what we were trying to achieve, they understood, but they also operate in a way that aligns to our values as an organization. And had real great synergy with from a cultural and value perspective. And so that really helped. And that was one of the main reasons why we went with them.
You mentioned,
As well as like, they showcase really well their ability to flex up and down,
mm,
their expertise in the market, one of the global leaders in that space. And so being able to tap into that expertise was really important for us as well. And they evidenced that in a way that gave us confidence that they were the right solution for us.
you'd mentioned the two criteria, one being the kind of availability of the skill sets, the technology, and then obviously the commercials. Um, Even 5 years ago, it would have been just probably two of those things, the skill set and the commercials, and then you move on. This tech piece is becoming really important in the last 3, 4 years,
Yeah.
that, RPO partners aren't just about outsourcing to a bunch of recruiters that they employ at a price that's more competitive. It's about this underlying tech value. So talk to me about that. What are you looking for from a technology perspective from an RPO partner, an outsource partner? That perhaps the industry didn't look at for this stuff 5 years ago.
Yeah. And I guess that there's so much tech out there now. It's but there's all sorts of you know enhancements that you can make through technology. What's important is it's the right solution and
Mm.
the right solution for you, and that's where I think their expertise in the market and the other clients that they are working with and tried and tested technology that they could advise us on was really important. And so we use Workday as our ATS. We use Phenom on top of that as CRM. But so some of that technology is around how do we get that working better for us? Where are you seeing that elsewhere being used, and how do we enhance it? And so some of that's just advice, but the other thing is, additional technology that they can overlay on there that's going to also help. So their own platform is something that we use to help with some of the data points that's still missing in the process. And so the reason why we have some missing data points is because Workday is a global platform and we all operate in a slightly different way. And so some of the steps within the statuses you can't report on today just because of how the workflows have to be. Whereas some of the technology that they are introducing for us will fill those gaps. So again, get into the minutiae of each step within a process so that you can, it's aggregation of marginal gains. And as you get closer and closer to the detail, you can enhance the service that we offer the business and the experience that we give to our candidates. So that technology is really supporting that.
How far into this are you now? Is it fully up and running? How long did it take?
So the RFP was 6 months, which was quick for such a massive piece of work. Because we've outsourced early careers, experienced hire, and contingent moved as well. So everything has gone across. And we went live for early careers on the 1st of September, ready for the next cohort. And 1st of October last year for experienced hire. So about 6 months in to implementation now. And we've literally just last week. So I think it's just best practice to go, this is what we signed off in October. This is what we went live with. We all agreed this is how we were going to operate. Now we're in the reality. What's working? What do we want to continue to focus on? How do we enhance and evolve what we've got? And so we're just starting to have those conversations now. So yeah, it's been about 6 months of embedding.
And what does the data look like so far in terms of the objectives you set out to achieve?
So we're already seeing some really great steps forward in a number of areas, but I think we went live at a time which brought a whole different challenge in that we saw a peak in hiring literally as we went live. So what we said that our demand was going to be, it was a lot busier. And so they had to adapt to that quite quick. So I think initially we probably saw a little bit of a dip in our SLAs, but now we're back to where we were, which is the baseline. So I guess we're almost lifting and shifting for now, which is why now we're starting to talk about, right, how do we now drive it forward? So
probably the commercial improvements were faster, and then you're looking to just maintain is good enough, and then you get the improvements once the relationships are more developed and the process is a little more locked in.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was we did not like a knowledge transfer period where we're moving everything across, and they also need time to understand how we operate, what's working, what's not working, to be able to come back and go, actually, now we think that this is the way that we want to do it.
And what did you keep in-house? I know you said you moved everything, but technically, what areas are still actually within PwC?
So the governance is still within PwC. So we have a quality and assurance team. So my team now have become my direct team. Obviously, my team is the solution, but my PwC direct team are a quality assurance team. So they're doing auditing to make sure that we're delivering against policy, which I had a quality assurance team before. So and those checks and balances were done with the internal team. We're now doing that for the supplier.
Mm.
So it's just, I think, it's best practice, to make sure
Strategy, all that kind of stuff there.
strategy remained internal.
Mm.
So yeah, all the strategy is also in-house. So
Areas like employer branding, they in-house or gone?
employer branding, tactical, when strategy stayed.
Okay.
So like global led change from a brand perspective will be directed from PwC into the solution, and then they'll tactically execute that.
And looking back, right, if you're kind of going right 3.5 years later, what would you have learned? What have you learned that you say, okay, I could have fast tracked something, I would have come to a decision sooner, or things you wouldn't have done or would have done slower or faster?
I don't think we could have done anything any faster. I think it was a massive change, and it was important that we got it right. And so the time it took, we know was, but I wouldn't want to shorten that, because then you'd like almost feel like we were cutting corners, which it was too important to do that. The impact was too big on the business. I guess it was a big change, and so we had to have the confidence it was the right model. And so taking the time to do that, I don't think I would change that. I think trying to explain to a supplier how complex we are as an organization, I think, I'm not sure that fully landed. So that makes implementation a little bit harder. But the problem with a complex organization is you can say we're complex, and a lot of the large businesses that I've worked for would all argue that they're the most complex.
Yeah.
So so trying to articulate that to a supplier until you live and breathe it, I think is
Next to impossible.
yeah. And so although I'm going, what would I do differently? Would I have explained that in a different way? I'm not sure I could, but I think that is one of the challenges, is in most organizations of scale carry complexity. The important thing I think you need from a supplier is the ability to pivot. That's how you deal with complexity. But the detail of that, you can't really bring to life until you're actually in it. I don't
Hard
think.
to describe, hard to anticipate, basically.
Yeah.
But it's probably somebody who's been through the trenches as a supplier that have demonstrated that they can pivot for everybody else,
Exactly.
even if it's not the exact same type of pivoting.
Yeah.
But I can understand from a supplier perspective, they always hear everything's complex, and probably 80% of the time, it's not really. It's somebody's version of complexity, but they've seen worse.
Yeah.
So when you're kind of talking to other leaders, Gemma, just to kind of close, I think the last few years, maybe the idea of RPOing has gone slightly out of favor. People thinking, no, we can do it better in-house. We can do it better ourselves. We can set up a service center somewhere else in the world. What would you say to others who are maybe dismissing the idea of outsourcing too quickly?
I think that you just need to make the devil is in the detail, is what I would say. And doing a full review of your service before you make a decision on what the right solution is critical. Because it's not the right. So to outsource, it's not the right solution for everyone to outsource. It's not the right solution to have everything in. Sometimes it's a mixture of both. It really depends on the challenge you're trying to solve for, but also the state of the nation that you're in. And because we wanted to really push forward our TA experience for all concerned, and really advance the processes via technology, we wanted to do a lot. And actually outsourcing that was the right solution for us to be able to do that quickly, commercially, and with the expertise that we needed to pull in on. It was the right thing at the time.
If I could summarize, it's probably slow down the initial decision, but then you can move fast in the execution, with an RFP process and implementation with the right partner.
Yeah.
It's just don't do it the other end.
No, exactly. Make sure you're taking the time up front to really understand, what you're trying to solve for, and like I say, the state of the nation. And to do that, you really have to have the data, and you need to have that the time to listen and validate what's being said as well from the business. So
Gemma, pleasure to hear the story, and thank you for sharing it. Enjoying to hear how the next few years work out with as you evolve the partnership with the provider as well. Thanks for taking the time to come to Sitges to tell the story. Obviously, you didn't just come for here. We're looking forward to hearing more of the story and do a workshop with you later on. Thank you.
thank you.
And thank you for listening and enjoying, hopefully, this week's podcast. We'll be back again next week with another great podcast that we're recording here in Sitges from our supper club. But until then, have a good week. Take care.